Hi, this is Abby from Witchcraft Criminal History. How you doing today? Hopefully you're doing well. Well, I'm doing a video which I know you guys have been looking forward to. Okay, because I have let a little bit of a leak a couple of days ago in regards to what this video is. Well, let's get into it. This is on the world's youngest female serial killer. Today, when you hear about child murderers, you probably think of James Bulger case, where two 10-year-old boys, picked up a 3-year-old boy named James Bulger and abducted the little boy from a shopping centre and did awful things to this little boy and left him on the railway line. You probably all have heard about James Bulger. This is not about James Bulger. There was a crime prior to James Bulger, and this is in the late 1960s, and this was to deal with a female serial killer, and this was a child. And this serial killer her name is Mary Flora Bell. She was also known as Mary Bell. Now let's learn about Mary Bell. Mary Bell was born on the 26th of May 1957. She lived in England. And she was, since she was a little girl, she was brought up in Scotswood, which is the west end of Newcastle in the UK. That's where she was brought up. This was the slums of that particular area in Newcastle. It was the slums. It was derelict, and at this particular time when her murders occurred, there was a lot of refurbishment. Old buildings were being torn down. A lot of people were being displaced at this particular time. And children, regardless of age, even if they were 2 years old, would leave home and play out in the streets. It was commonplace. And a lot of parents, wouldn't think anything different about letting their kids out to play. It's not like today, you would probably consider today be an awful parent if you allowed your 2-year-old son or 2-year-old child to go walking around the streets playing with the neighbourhood kids. It's not done. Even with older kids, even if they're like 8 or 9, you still wouldn't, allow your kids to go and play in the streets. Especially, like, say, soon as they have the breakfast, they go out and play. And as soon as it gets dark, they have to come home. Nowadays, you would not think for one moment of doing that. But in the 1960s and prior to the 1960s, in the 1970s, it was commonplace, and a lot of parents, did that. And it wasn't uncommon for a lot of the households that there be one working parent, or even both working parents. And prostitution was also very prevalent in some areas, or in the really, really poor and derelict places. And this is not just secluded in the UK. This is widespread. This happens in the US. If you're really, really poor, like dirt poor, all you really want to do is get money to put food on the table, and if you've got children, to give children food. Your welfare comes second best to your children. If your children go into bed with an empty stomach, you will do anything in your power to provide for your children. Well, most decent parents anyway. And some parents, or some mothers, especially if they were single mothers, and this was a big no-no, in the 1950s, 1940s, 1960s, it is a big no-no. It was considered disgraceful for a single mother. And that was very, very prevalent. Or for history, it wasn't a good thing for a mother to be a single mother. And that's regardless of class. So this is universal, regardless of class, even if you were poor or part of the royal family. It was a universal thing. It was not good to be a single parent or being a mother. I mean, having a child out of wedlock, I'm pretty much saying. Having a child out of wedlock. It's just not done. And that, was the way it was. So it's not really too surprising that Mary Bell's mother, because she came from a bit of an abusive household, Mary Bell's mother was a prostitute. She was a prostitute, and she sold her body for sexual services to put a roof over their heads. And she allowed her little girl to go out playing on the streets. And this little girl would see strange men coming into her home all the time. And there was alleged rumours that because Mary Bell was a girl, that her mother actually pimped out her own daughter. That she would have customers coming in, and she would not only allow herself to service the men, but also little Mary Bell, even when she was very, very small. And like when I'm talking about small, I mean prior to school age. And that is despicable. It is despicable. I think even back then it was disgraceful. It was despicable. But there was a strong suspicion that ever since, she was very, very small, Mary Bell was prostituted out by her parents. Which, isn't really nice, She's a little girl. However, that's the way, she was brought up, sadly. And yeah, that's what happened to little Mary Bell, how she grew up, in Scotswood. So, let's talk about the killing, shall we? On the 25th of May, 1968, this was a day before she actually turned 11 years old. So she was, at that time you could say she was 10 years old. It was just before her 11th birthday. She lured a 4-year-old boy by the name of Martin Brown to a derelict house. And what she would do was that she would, massage the throat. She would massage the neck, saying that to the child, you got a sore throat, you got a sore throat. And she would slowly strangle the child to death. And she did this a lot of times. And she did this to a lot of children. However, they were fortunate that they were able to survive the attack. Because to say the least, Mary Bell, you could say, was a bit of a bully. And there was another attack. What she did, this child survived. It was a girl, and they not only did that, the strangulation, they also got dirt and shoved the dirt in the child's mouth. Whether they did this to little Martin Brown, I don't know. However, she, killed this little boy. This little boy, I think, wasn't discovered right away. He was left in this house. And this little boy was left there, and they saw an empty capsule of pills next to her. next to this little boy, next to Martin Brown. They naturally thought it was an accidental poisoning. They didn't think it was murder. They, couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it, and they didn't want to believe that a child could kill another child. So it was considered by the authorities as an accidental death of little Martin Brown. And this little boy, sadly, to his family's grief and disbelief, he was known as Rat Alley Boy, because that what it was nicknamed. That area of that slum where that derelict house was, it was in an area called Rat Alley. And they didn't want this little boy, this poor innocent 4-year-old boy, being associated with rats. However, the papers dubbed this little boy as Rat Alley Boy. Which is really, really sad. And as I said at the beginning of the video, parents would allow their kids to go and play. Play out in the streets with other children. It was common. It was very, very common. So, she didn't thought anything, bad about allowing her 4-year-old to go and play with other children. However, she probably regrets to this day of allowing her boy to go out and play that day. Which is really, really sad. But a little thing also, when Mary Bell was killing, she had a best friend. And her best friend was Norma Joyce Bell. Norma Joyce Bell or Norma Bell and Mary Bell aren't related. They're not related. Yes, they share the same last name, but they're not related. So they're not sisters, they're not cousins, they're not nieces or anything like that. No, there's no relation. They're just best friends. And with little Norma Bell, she was born in 1955, and she was born in 1955. She, unlike Mary Bell, had what we would call today a learning disability. So she was considered slow. So she, was definitely the follower. Mary was the instigator. And these two children, Mary Bell, during the killings, Mary Bell and Norma Bell would quite often go through these derelict streets, break into people's houses, vandalizing people's houses, vandalizing abandoned houses, in Scotswood. And, they would play pranks on people quite a few times. And sometimes they even play pranks on the police. But as to prove, these are children. These are children. On the 31st of July, 1968, these two little girls decided to strike again. This is when they actually killed again. And this is a good, visual on escalation. This time they abducted 3-year-old Brian Howe. They took this little boy into the wastelands in Scotswood. And they did the same ritual, massaging the throat, telling Brian, he's got a sore throat, and slowly, strangling the child to death. But that wasn't the end with poor Brian Howe. They weren't finished. By oath, they weren't finished with Brian Howe even after he died. They weren't finished. Because when they found this little boy, he had Like, he was naked from the waist down. And on his stomach was carved by scissors, carved an M on the child's stomach. And there was numerous lacerations to Brian Howe's genitals. And there were also lacerations and scratches on his legs as well. Because what these children were doing, they were trying to amputate little Brian Howe's penis. That's what these two little girls, these two 10, 11-year-old girls were doing. But when they did that, because when they found the body of little Brian Howe, the M was originally an N, but when somebody came back, they revisited the body and drew another line to make it an M. So it was an N, then they turned it into an M. And it's my hypothesis that that was Mary Bell. But when this little boy was discovered, and they realised that these injuries were sustained by another child, they started seriously looking for a child. However, they did not know of what child. This was, Scotswood was a derelict area. Buildings were being knocked down, as I said at the beginning of the video. There was heaps of children running around. Heaps of children. So what child could do this? It was a needle in a haystack. However, these children weren't exactly the sharpest tools in the shed. But then again, these are children. They don't think like adults or anything like that. They do not do that. And I think it was the murder of Brian Howe. I think it wasn't Brian Howe. I don't really think that it was, Martin Brian. I think it was Brian Howe. That Mary Bell would actually... this is how they caught her. Mary Bell knocked on... I think it's Brian Howe. I could be mistaken. Could be Martin Brown. However, I don't think so. They knocked on, Brian Howe's house on the door, and they went to the mother and said, "Oh, may I see Brian Howe?" And she'd seen a little girl, standing at her doorstep. She was crying because she just found out her son died. And she thought, the first thing got in front of her mind, oh, this must be one of my son's friends. How am I going to tell her that he's dead? How am I going to tell her? That was going through this poor mother's mind. And, she crouched down to look at Mary Bell. And, told her, I have some bad news for you, but my son is dead. And Mary Bell smiled and looked at her and said, I know, I want to see him in his coffin. She was taken back by this, and rightfully so, and Mary Bell and Norma Bell ran off laughing. They thought it was a big joke. Then, because she reported this incident to the police, and they looked into Mary Bell and Norma Bell. When they looked through Mary Bell's journals, her school journals for all of her homework and all that, she actually wrote and drew the actual crime scene of the first murder of Martin Brown. Everything. Right down to where the boy's body was, the tablet capsules, everything. She drew all of it on a piece of paper. And she was very, very pleased about that. She was pleased. And once the police got this, evidence, they decided to bring in Mary Bell and Norma Bell into the police station. And a lot of people, was stunned about this. They're taking into 10 and 11-year-old kids. Why would they do that? Why? So they, charged, they questioned them, and they were charged for murder of both Brian Howe and Martin Brown. When they went to court on the 17th of December 1968 in Newcastle, Norma Bell was actually acquitted from the crimes, and the reason why she was acquitted was because they discovered and they believed that she had a learning disability, and she was led by Mary Bell. And because she was led by Mary Bell, they let Norma Bell go. However, it didn't turn out that well for Mary Bell. Mary Bell was convicted of manslaughter. She was convicted of manslaughter, not murder. And the reason why she was convicted of manslaughter instead of murder was because it was on the grounds of diminished responsibility. As they learned from a psychiatrist on trial, that Mary Bell was a psychopath. So they believed back in the 1960s, if you are a psychopath, then you got diminished responsibility. You cannot control your murderous, rages, your urges. Which we now know is a load of bollocks. That's in psychology. We know that's a load of bollocks. If you're a psychopath, you know what's right, what's wrong, and you choose to do wrong. You choose it. You could easily choose not to do wrong and still be a psychopath. But back in those days, it was considered a mental illness. And the judge's name was, Justice Cusack, and he described Mary Bell's crimes and Mary Bell herself, and he considered Mary Bell to be a very grave risk to other children. So she was, a huge risk. And, and she was sentenced to imprisonment. And she was actually sent to Red Bank Secure Unit in Newton Le Willows, Lancashire. And this place was mainly for boys, so it was unusual for a girl to be sent here. And usually these were for young juveniles who committed, serious crimes, but not really murder. And it was pretty much like a school, pretty much. This is the way this place was. And this place was also housed, a little bit extra information. Also housed John Venables. John Venables was one of James Bulger killers. So this was still functioning 25 years later. And I'm not quite sure. It's probably still running today. I am not quite sure. And, she was convicted and she served her time. In 1980, Mary Bell, she was 23 years of age. She was released. She was released by Ashcombe Grange Open Prison. So she was transferred from that school to the prison. Because the other one was for young offenders. This is for, adult offenders. And she only served 12 years. She only served 12 years, and she was granted anonymity. and she was allowed to have a new life, a new identity. No one knows where she is, and no one knows what her name is now. All we know is not Mary Flora Bell. We know that for a fact. And we know that they did find her. And, they have found her, since then. And she has a child. She actually has a daughter now. And I think she also has grandchildren as well now. On the 21st of May, 2003, she actually went to court again, and she battled to have anonymity not only for herself, but her daughter and her extended for life. They wanted for life. They wanted to be away from the publicity. And I think that it was actually granted. So, no one knows where Mary Bell is, where her family is. We do know that she has children and grandchildren. That's what we do know. So yeah, and this is about the case, of, little Mary Bell. And Mary Bell is still alive today. And yeah, but you could definitely tell these crimes. Like, especially with the second killing of little Brian Howe. He had genital mutilation. This tells you this was sexually motivated. When there's crimes, crimes and mutilations in regards to the genital area, regardless whether the victim is male or female, this is sexually motivated. And, that's the reason why, and I totally agree, reason why a lot of us believe that Mary Bell was a victim of, sexual abuse during childhood. Because if you're being a victim of abuse, and Mary Bell was no doubt a victim of abuse, you have an urge to take power. You're powerless, because when you're being abused, when you know you're being abused, whether it's physical, sexual, psychological, you don't have control. You are the victim, and you feel powerless. You feel weak. And that's the reason why Mary Bell killed young children. Like, heck, she was 10 and 11 when she murdered these children. But these children were all under the age of 5 years of age. One was 4, one was 3. And the reason for that is because she's bigger. She's bigger, and she can take control of these kids. She can not only deceive them to get them away from their families, but she can also, get control over the child. So these were definitely sexually motivated. Hopefully you enjoyed this video about Mary Bell. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Have a great day, and blessed be.